All this week, we are spending time in this dialogue from Jesus, this monologue at the end of chapter 5, where he is responding to the religious leaders in Jerusalem. They've basically said, who are you to break the Sabbath? Who are you to challenge how we do the Sabbath? And so Jesus is giving them an answer. And there's one verse in what I'm about to read to you that we're kind of going to zero in on today. Jesus says to them, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it." So that's the key right there. The Father is the one who raises people to life, and so therefore the Son also is part of that work. Now, in the ancient Jewish thought, only God is capable of bringing someone back to life. And we haven't read about it yet, but we're going to see Jesus doing that same thing on a very literal standpoint. First, we're going to have the story of Lazarus. Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And then later, with Jesus himself, his death and resurrection, that's the Father bringing someone back from the literal dead. But there's a whole element to this that I don't think is actually about the physical life and death. It's about spiritual life and death. All throughout John's gospel, I've been struck by the idea that he's doing something at the surface level, like the very literal meaning with, again, physical life and death. But then he's also doing something in the spiritual sense as well. And I think that's true here. All throughout Jesus' ministry so far in John, we've seen him going about the work of bringing people back to life, not from a physical standpoint, but from a very spiritual standpoint. Jesus, in the way that he is teaching people, in the way that he is leading them to follow him, in the way that he's healing them and calling them back to relationship with God, he is giving people back their life, calling them back from this dead spiritual standpoint and calling them back into a life that involves following him. And this is something that wasn't necessarily for God alone, even though the Pharisees and the religious leaders in this passage, I think, are stuck on that purely physical standpoint. Anytime in John's gospel where we're talking about the Son, there's two sons being talked about. Whether they realize it or not, John, I think, creatively, as he's writing, is hinting at two sons. Of course, we know that Jesus is the Son of God, but who's the first son? The only begotten Son of God. Yes, Jesus. Set that aside for a second and think about Israel. We're over and over again in the Old Testament, we're told that Israel is the son of God, the firstborn son of God. And so there's a very real standpoint that Jesus is reminding these religious leaders, the ones who should have known this from the very beginning. They were the sons of God. It was on them. The whole reason Israel existed in the first place was so that they could bring people back to life. They could show them what it looked like to follow God, which was a way that led to life. Not following God was the way that led to death. We've seen that even in the past few weeks as we've been studying here. And yet, here are the religious leaders. Jesus has just healed a man. He's brought him back to life with God, relationship with God, by making him able to go back to the temple again instead of just laying by the pool, and some physical life too. He's restored his way of living. And yet, all they care about, the religious leaders, is that Jesus has broken the Sabbath. And it's like he's telling them, you have missed the whole point of the Sabbath and the whole point of what you are supposed to be about. You're supposed to be helping people to understand God's way of living and how that calls you out of this spiritual death and into new life. And yet they're not doing it. And so who is Jesus? He is the Son of the Father who has come to show people that there is a, yes, very literal resurrection that he is capable of, like God, but also the spiritual resurrection. He is calling people back to life. Today, we're having you read from the story in the Old Testament. It's Hannah's poem in 1 Samuel 2, and there's just one line in here I think that's really cool. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. And if just go on to read this today as you do your reading for this morning, and just think about that. God is the one who does all of these things, who raises people back to life. He helps the needy. He is with the poor. He is the one who is with the hungry, the barren. I mean, this is a picture of God, not just as someone who decides, oh, you get to live today. You have to, you don't get to live today. The way of Jesus, and therefore the way of God, is about restoring people to life. Not life on a physical sense, but life in a spiritual, rich sense. And I don't know what that looks like for you today. How alive do you feel is the one question that comes to mind. But I think very truly we have to ask ourselves, we have to wrestle with this. Is the way that we are living right now, is it more conducive to full, rich life, fulfilling life? That is using all of our potential and bringing us joy and happiness no matter what our circumstances are? Or is the way that we are living a road that leaves us feeling spiritually dead and lonely and empty inside? And if your answer is the second one, then Jesus is saying to you, there is a way that leads to life, and you can still find it. And I think in this passage today, Jesus is it's like he's almost shaking the Pharisees and the religious elite, saying, you guys, you're supposed to be part of it. And once we wrestle with that question as individuals, with our relationship with Jesus, as Christians, we are called to help other people wrestle with this question. In this story, we're not just the ones who are being rescued. We are the religious elite who Jesus is challenging here. Is the way we, as leaders in the church, is the way that we are living as followers of God. Are we helping to bring people back to life, or are we causing them to feel more dead inside? I don't know which of those questions you resonate with more, if you need to wrestle with this as an individual or as a leader in the church. For me, I'm wrestling with this as a leader in the church. Is the way that I live helping people find life in the name of Jesus? Or like the Pharisees, am I so stuck to my own model that it's actually harder for people to come and to know the life-giving way of Jesus that he wants us to follow? I hope that's helpful for you as you study this morning. Let us know what you're thinking of the plan. We would love to hear from you.